Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at BTV World. In a world which is of course becoming more and more interconnected, that too with each passing day, it would be then legitimate of us to then of course expect the fact that it is also becoming equally tolerant too. However, when we do study this practically, we understand that of course this is not the case. Intolerance is one of the biggest problems that we all face in our society today, and this is something upon which we'll be shedding light during the course of today's conversation. We'll not only be talking about the very root causes of intolerance as it does exist in the Pakistani society, but we'll also be talking about how it of course then impacts us not only in our homes, in our workplaces, in our educational institutions, but also by that virtue in our community at large. In this regard, we'll also be shedding light upon the fact that we do see over a period of time the Pakistani state legislating so as to do away with different forms of discrimination and intolerance in of course whatever form it may so exist. But the question then is that how effective have all these laws then been? This is also something upon which we'll be shedding light today. Last but not the least, we'll also be talking about, of course, the role of the government, the role of the civil society, the role of Pakistani media and the educational institutions when it comes to ensuring that we all work towards a more tolerant and, of course, a more inclusive society. All of this today, that too with an extremely pertinent panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for today's show is Dr. Raheel Kareem, who is a senior consultant psychiatrist. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Alongside him, I have Ms. Sayyida Fatma Batul, who is a social analyst and she's also an educationist. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. And via telephone line, we'll be joined by Basim Nasser, who's a youth activist. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Now, before we start the conversation on today's topic, let's have a look at this brief report.
Intolerance and discrimination are pervasive issues that transcend borders, affecting societies worldwide. In the context of Pakistan, these challenges manifest in various forms, impeding social harmony and hindering the nation's progress. The roots of intolerance and discrimination among Pakistani youth often lie in a complex interplay of socio-economic, cultural and historical factors. Ethnic, religious and sectarian differences contribute to divisive attitudes, perpetuating stereotypes and reinforcing prejudices. Economic disparities further exacerbate social tensions. Technology, despite many benefits, has also been used to spread hate speech, bigotry, racism and intolerance. The menace of digital hate and fake news spread via social media has become a major issue in today's fast-changing digital age, affecting the youth. Hate speech on social media platforms can incite violence and create a toxic online environment that can have real-life consequences. Addressing intolerance requires a multifaceted approach. Educational reforms aimed at promoting tolerance, diversity, and critical thinking can lay the foundation for a more inclusive society. Community-based initiatives that foster dialogue and understanding can bridge gaps between different segments of the population. Media plays a crucial role in shaping perceptions, and responsible representation can contribute to dismantling stereotypes. Intolerance and discrimination in Pakistan poses significant challenges to the nation's social fabric. By understanding its root causes and implementing comprehensive strategies, Pakistan can cultivate a more inclusive and tolerant environment.
Welcome back. We just saw this report. Now to get the conversation started with you, sir. So when we do talk about intolerance, that too at a very basic level, we understand the fact that definitely this is something which is just not always triggered by individual factors. A lot of times we see that the particular socio-cultural dynamics, they in themselves also constitute a very important factor because of which people tend to become more intolerant of others. So from a psychiatric perspective, how would you explain that?
So Fatima, it was a very, very good question and a very pertinent question.
Thank you, sir.
But I think we must kind of first understand what tolerance and intolerance means.
Right.
So being tolerant is being able to respect other people's beliefs, other people's cultures, their lifestyle, their values. We live in a very global world which is very diverse. So diversity has to be embraced and acknowledged. Differences have to be acknowledged between people. You may disagree with that, but I think tolerance is the ability to harness your emotions in the presence of disagreement in accordance to your own beliefs.
That in a sir, very harmonious way.
Of course, of course. And similarly, I think Intolerance is the exact opposite of that, that you sometimes cannot respect other people's views, emotions, their lifestyles, their values, their beliefs.
True.
So I see tolerance on a spectrum, actually. Um, and it also depends on how many times you've been made tolerant.
That's right, sir, but to a great extent, you would agree with me on this when I say one's upbringing, one's education is also a very important factor which would actually dictate how tolerant, or for that matter, intolerant you are. On which I'll come to. Here we must talk about this from the viewpoint of our society, from the viewpoint of our culture, because a lot of times we see that we have those typical socio-cultural norms which actually perpetuate intolerance. So how would you comment on that? Because this, at the end of the day, is something which emanates from the society. So definitely it would be legitimate to then expect that this is something which needs to be done away from the society at large too.
Yeah, it's a very important question. Thanks for asking. That we are in the state, the society, the social fabric is in the state of emergency which we need to address right now. And it's high time, because we are actually not going into deep details of the reasons behind these factors, why we are having intolerant behavior increasingly day by day. So we have to see first the reasons. So we have social issues, we have social factors, we have socio-political factors, we have socio-economic factors, family factors. Major issue, that is socio-cultural factors. Cultural factor is basically the main theme on which we have to work, because the coexistence and then the inclusivity, that two terms inculcate the idea of tolerance. If we have to fight intolerance, we have to be, very much intolerant against the intolerant.
That's very rightly put by yourself, Ms. Fatma, but here social media over the period of time has also ended up being a very important triggering factor when it comes to cases of intolerance. On which I'll come to you, Basim, and here we must talk about how we do see, unfortunately, a growing intolerance in Pakistani youth today. So as a young person yourself, what do you feel are the biggest causes of the same? Is it because of a lack of personal development of young people, or do you feel that this is just something which can be very directly attributed to a lack of proper, perhaps educational, or for that matter, employment opportunities?
Well, Fatma, I would like to segregate that.
Please do.
The first factor which contributes to the rise in intolerance is the economic factor. And the basic ingredient resulting into the economic factor is unemployment. I would like to tell you that more than 50% of the labor in Pakistan, which is not regulated, consists of the youngsters. And they are working under low salary, with high working hours, and due to that development. I would like to figure out another reason to that, which is no career counseling. And that is on the regards of the school. I've seen youngsters coming to me, and I've met a lot of youngsters. They're into their degrees. They have even completed their degrees. And even after completing the degrees, they are like they were not meant for that. So it is a duty primarily it is a duty of the schools at the stage of matriculation or O levels. It is the duty of the schools to educate them about the career counseling.
But in addition to that, do you not feel this is something that we do see happening in other parts, in other spheres of young people's life? For example, we do see more and more younger people now fall victim to road traffic accidents, and this was perhaps not the case, even a decade ago. So do you not feel that, that intolerance generally has increased in Pakistani youth?
Absolutely, I agree, and there's a reason to that, I guess. I mean, the youngsters in Pakistan, they have no way forward to put their energies in. I mean, if I'll just give you one example about the schooling system of Pakistan. Earlier in the days, there was a requirement, and it is an international requirement, to have big playgrounds in all the schools. And right now, even in our daily lives, if you count out 8 schools out of 10, they are made in the residential buildings, and there is no playground in it. So we have not created ample opportunities for the youngsters going into the society.
Right. Opportunities, or for that matter, even initiatives, programs. But on the converse, we do have laws and policies in place, because over a period of time, we have seen quite a few progressive laws and policies being passed, more particularly which deal with different stratas of the Pakistani society, catering to, different kinds of injustice, different kinds of intolerance, even for that matter, discrimination by virtue of these very specific laws. So could you enlighten us about the importance of the same?
Yeah, this is very interesting. We have basically the Protection Against Harassment of Women at Workplace Act to 2010, and we have latest amendments. And the latest amendment in 22 and 22 renders or is attributed to a very interesting highlighting judgment of Madam Aisha Malik. And
Honorable
Nadia
Justice
Naz's case,
Aisha Malik.
yeah, it is just a remarkable judgment which includes the word discrimination as harassment for the first time in the history of Pakistan.
Discrimination on the basis of your gender would
Yeah.
now be construed to be sexual harassment.
Now this is the law.
This is
Under
the law of
Section
the
2H
country.
it has been added. So now the perception of law is there, but there is no awareness as such. So the implementation issues are still, the hurdle in combating this issue particularly.
Also, Ms. Fatma, in addition to that, when we do talk about the more marginalized sectors of the Pakistani society, be it the trans community or for that matter even persons with different abilities, we do see that even very specific legislation has been passed in this regard, where there have been very categoric clauses relating to not discriminating against them.
Yeah,
so this is definitely a positive that we do need to highlight.
I would like to highlight a case at FOSPA, which is the Federal Ombudsman Secretariat, and we saw the cases very much rightly handled there for the rights of the transgenders, and they were for the first time in the history of Pakistan in 2023, they are being catered on the discrimination issues.
Right.
So gender basis is the main theme, which is very much connected with the issue of intolerance in
Right.
youth specifically.
Right, but definitely this is something that we need to work upon more. We do see a good headway by virtue of these laws, but definitely we need to aspire towards more effective implementation. Sir, I'll come to you, and here we must talk about both the short-term as well as the long-term impact of intolerance and discrimination in whatever form it may so exist on individuals. Now, we do see cases of racial injustice, we do see cases of gender discrimination, like she has very rightly so mentioned, and even cases where the trans community in the country has been discriminated against. But how do you feel does it impact any individual, both short-term and long-term?
The impact is on individuals, and then if you see individuals as a collection of people, it turns into a culture or it turns into a society. So I really think that tolerance or intolerance is basically an attitude, and then that attitude can turn into a habit, and then it can turn into a personality trait which is reliably reproduced in different kind of social situations. So as much as we have the genetics, the hand that we are dealt with by nature, the world we are nurtured in is what also determines our emotions and how we deal with them and how we express them.
So true.
Cultural factors are incredibly important in the fact that if you see various cultures, and sorry, I'll go into the historical background a little bit. If you actually look at the Ottoman Empire, Muslims actually built churches. They actually protected Christians in Bosnia. So, great example of religious tolerance. If you actually look at Spain, the Islamic Spain, many centuries ago, art, culture, everything flourished because all the communities came together to produce a really harmonious and unified community where progression could take place. So not only there are individual factors, there are many social, again, the sort of leadership that one has.
Sir, but one question which I would like to put to you is the fact that when we do talk about one's own biases, one's own prejudices, is there any way that you can actually tackle them, or for that matter handle them, so as to stop your own self from becoming intolerant? Because sometimes, at least from an objective viewpoint, I understand that there are a lot of issues that one perhaps may go through, which you can very easily control, maybe by changing your mindset, maybe by changing the perspective with which you look things at.
Fatima, through clinical practice, I think one of the most difficult things to change is mindsets, but I fully take your point. Mindset, how it develops is very important. We are nurtured in a particular way. We'll see our parents being intolerant, we'll see our teachers being intolerant. We go on the road, we see other people intolerant. And that is what you learn as a child. That is what you will eventually practice. So intolerance, although it is taught, but there is not much emphasis on the emotion of tolerance. So you have to have that real emotional intelligence.
True.
And you have to be in tune with your own self, with your environment, to be able to kind of work these things out and then develop a mindset which actually promotes healthy use of all emotions, including tolerance and intolerance.
And sir, professionals like yourself have a very important role to play, because if you get timely interventions, if you get timely treatments, there's so much that you can correct that too at a very early stage.
Of course. I think training begins at home. I think there's a lot of work done that bonding of all sorts, including children having emotional insecurity, happens in the first 5 years of anybody's life. Okay. So if we are reared properly and we have the right role models, we are more likely to copy that. If you can see somebody, if a child sees, if a son sees his father shaving, I'm pretty sure he'll put shaving foam on his face. So role models are very, very important.
Right. On which I'll come to you, Basim, and here we must talk about the role of social media or media generally. We do understand the fact that over a period of time, social media has generally made us all more aware, more educated, more informed of our surroundings. But at the same time, one thing that we cannot ignore is also the fact that it has also raised not one, rather various concerns, be it that of cybersecurity, be it that of cyberbullying, or for that matter, even in cases more than one, of data privacy. So overall, if you were to then evaluate social media's role, how do you see it both at one end challenging intolerance and at the other end perpetuating it?
Right. So the role of media and social media is very important. I'll give you an example, which was regarding the COVID-19 thing. It was the media. We have seen people who were not interested in following any kind of SOP. And then we have seen a drastic and a very strong campaign through social media and media, which made a lot of people following those SOPs. I'll be talking about, first of all, I'll be talking about the Article 19 of the Constitution, which is freedom of speech. And again, we need to draw a line between freedom of speech, which is the news, and also the fake news. To combat fake news, there was a law which was called the Prevention of Electronic Crime Act 2016 PICA. For some people, it was a regulation. For some people, it was a draconian law. But what we need to understand is that the role of media is to not just advertise, but also to aware the people. For me, the role of the media, which the media needs to play, is regarding the promotion of Article 25A, which is the right to education in Pakistan specifically. So where the role of the media is very important, it needs also to be regulated specifically for the social media.
But in addition to that, Basim, when we talk about, overall evaluating the role of social media, that too with regards to encouraging public discourse, to what extent do you feel has it actually been successful when it comes to laying down the right narrative, a narrative which promotes that culture of tolerance and inclusivity?
We are going towards the right track, to be honest. We have seen a paradigm shift from the political scuffles and chat shows towards the podcast and the shows like we are in today. I've seen the paradigm shift that people are talking about not just the political slogans, but the policies. We were always attracted towards the political slogans, and we were not debating over the political policies or the impact of those policies. So in today's era, we have been watching a lot of experts and over the television and social media talking about the policies and their impact, which can obviously make a good choice for the people of Pakistan to understand the futuristic approach.
Right, Basim. To which you would want to add something, Fatma, because we do understand again that, social media is a double-edged sword. It has its pros, but it also has its cons. To what extent do you feel has it or has it not actually perpetuated intolerance in our society today?
Today's age, that is called data age, media and particularly social media is the key role or the key factor through which we can fight this issue of intolerance. And in this regard, media has to play much more better roles, because I feel the youth is divided, because we have a lot many things which are not appropriate or even age appropriate, or maybe in ethical or morality we can say the particular things which shall not be, being so popular, but youth is following that. But at the same time we have the choice not to view and view
Of
the
course.
other thing.
But do you not feel when it comes to social media here, other issues that we do need to look at, of course, is that of fake news, of misinformation. So how do you propose can we tackle that? And we do understand that, yes, these can also be possible reasons for which perhaps we are perpetuating intolerance in the society too.
Yeah, media is actually playing a pivotal role in, fostering intolerance as well, with apologies, because we see youth following certain news or certain materials which are not correct, but without investigating, they are bound to, follow them. And they are then just following and it is becoming like an habit. So we have to discourage this. We must inculcate the culture that we first have to investigate whether a news is correct or not. We shall not behave, we are more rather reactive without being investigative.
Right. Here the approach needs to change and one needs to be very actively preemptive. Rather than being reactionary, one needs to be preemptive so as to steer clear of any kind of biases that
Very
way.
true.
Sir, I'll come to you, and here we must talk about the role of mental health care professionals like yourself too. Earlier, you spoke about the role of educationists and parents per se when it comes to tackling intolerance. But what about the role of mental health care professionals? And this is something that we did see taking lead in the COVID-19 pandemic, where we did see a lot of doctors like yourself, mental health care professionals like yourself, actually leading such movements. So why not when it comes to cases like intolerance? Do you not feel that here again the responsibility is something which equally falls on people like yourself?
So look, mentally ill, mental illnesses, mental health professionals, psychiatric medications are all marginalized. I would go as far, I was talking earlier to somebody that, I was a team leader for about 80,000 population. So you cannot define or develop a service for people for an indefinite amount of population. So you have to define your population, you have to know how many children, how many older people, and then you have to kind of develop strategies and programs or initiatives targeted to these people and their relevant problems. So look, having lived like yourself elsewhere in the world, you see it on the road. People will let you go, and say thank you to you, and you may never see those people again. Not giving way to an ambulance or to a fire brigade is seen as a criminal act. Crossing a road, people are taught one of the most difficult things in England is to get a driving license, So tolerance is linked, or for that matter, any emotional control is linked with education. And I'm talking about specific education.
Targeted education.
Absolutely. So if you are taught to be able to wait, that's enormous teaching. To wait in a queue, to wait your turn, not to jump.
But sir, here if I may beg to differ, something that I would want to add here is also generational differences, because a lot of times we see that because of such generational differences, parents are at odds with their children and vice versa. Basim, I would want you to add to this further, precisely because you're the youngest on the panel today. So how would you explain this from your youth perspective, that when it comes to addressing these generational differences, which in themselves might be a very important cause of intolerance per se, how do you propose can we actually bridge that gap between parents and, of course, the youth?
Right. So generational gap has always been a big problem. But what we have always focused on, or what I've seen, that people of different generations always fight over the differences. But the actual thing is they need to educate each other. They have to educate, both generations have to educate each other between the gaps and about the gap. And also they need to talk about diversities of changing times, which is the time then and the time now. And also, they also need to talk about the challenges then and now. Because if they do not differentiate between the challenges then and now, they would always argue over that the challenges then were a lot and the challenges now are not that detrimental. So it is always debatable. But rather arguing on the comparison of the time, it is better to have a healthy debate over the issues then and now. I'll give you an example. I've seen, there was a guy, his father was telling him that we used to walk 8 miles to school and what you guys are doing. So the problem is, at that point, they were actually walking 8 miles to the school, but now the youngsters are also having sleepless nights due to the comparison and due to the challenging situation of the market being saturated and having less jobs. So the challenges of that time and now are equal in my eyes. So they need to have a healthy debate over them rather than arguing over it.
That's very rightly put by yourself, that definitely there needs to be a healthy debate, but at the same time that debate in itself, that needs to be respectful too. Sir, how would you comment on that, being the eldest on the panel today, because he's the youngest and you're the eldest?
Yeah, I take your point very well, but in my opinion, there is no such thing as a generation gap. I think there is everything known as a communication gap.
That's a very interesting way to look at it.
Of course. So if parents are able to communicate with their children, and if teachers are able to communicate with their pupils, if employers are able to communicate with their employees, then problems can be resolved. Further new things can be developed. So I think if their parents are educated and children have similar interests, like my daughter is a medical doctor, I can talk to her about many things, and then very gradually I put in the emotional and the social side of things to her. So communication, and obviously very rightfully so, in a way that is acceptable to young people, in a way that is respectful. Kids are very smart, you know. We think children are not smart. They are much smarter than maybe I was when I was of their age.
Now.
Promoting communication and healthy communication, I think, is the key to resolving any problem, whether it's between countries or individuals or
Right,
parents
sir. But then
or
again,
children.
sir, you see that this again, the focus shifts on the parents per se here too. Now, a lot of people might agree with what you're saying. Of course, that is the thing to do. You need to have the right communication skills. But then what about parents who perhaps might not be that self-aware of themselves, who might not be that educated, who might not be that literate enough to actually understand that, yes, if they are tackling issues with their children, they need to do it in a respectful manner. That children also have their own dignity, they also have their own privacy, on which I would want you to comment further, but from the viewpoint of a teacher. Now, this is something perhaps which you also come across in the course of your teaching, that too, you've been teaching in various education institutions, I understand.
Yeah,
so how do you tackle this? Because you see, a lot of times you might be coming across students who might not be that tolerant of your perspective, or vice versa.
I've been teaching since 22 years now, and I have come across a lot many incidents even during the class, because we have different inclusive environment at different colleges and universities, including the Civil Services Academy. We have different segments from Pakistan. We have different cultures sitting in one classroom, and we have to face a lot many times a difficult time to make the other student understand that you have to respect, you have to listen to what your peer, your fellow is saying, because if you will listen, he or she will listen too. So we inculcate the culture by practicing this, because we have
lead
to
by way of example.
Yeah, that's true, because the viewers can see us sitting here and they can't see what behind the camera is, but we can. So lack of knowledge doesn't mean that the truth or that particular thing does not exist.
And
So
I
this
feel that
perspective
teachers
has
here,
to be,
you
you
see,
know,
they need to be compassionate, they need to be empathetic at their own end too. Because
true.
in tolerance, then you get to deal with so many people, that too from so many different backgrounds. You get to interact with people who perhaps might not be, able-bodied. Then, of course, people who belong to the trans community. Here, a lot then rests on the teacher and the way that they tackle things. But when we talk about the work of the government, since you are teaching at the Civil Services Academy, and otherwise, of course, you've also had that benefit of working with the government, how do you see Pakistani government overall working to inculcate that culture of tolerance and, of course, peace?
Yes, specifically, you referred the academy. We recently, designed and introduced all recent amendments in particular regard of human rights, women's rights, and all marginalized sections in the curricula. And then we are specifically focused on giving all perspectives, all approaches of the law or the matter. It's not just one lens in which you have to, perceive the idea. It should be the broader perspective,
It
the
should be a
broader
more holistic
canvas.
approach.
Yeah. And the Pakistan government has been and is in the struggle of combating this issue. And
We've
for
also
which
signed some very important international treaties, CEDAW for one,
Yeah.
one on racial discrimination too.
Exactly. And we have ratified all these. And particularly Punjab government has specifically one initiative, that is Punjab Commission on the Status of Women. It has collaborated with the Lahore University of Women. So we have to, connect the bridge. We have to be, in the line with the youth and the government so that we can combat together.
And one thing that I would want to add, on which I would want you to comment further, sir, not only the government, the academia, but also the civil society and mental health care professionals like yourself, because we need to ensure that all the stakeholders then, they are on one page when it comes to addressing intolerance in the society.
Cannot disagree, but I think major issue is one of education. There isn't a country which is progressive in this world and which is not educated. And
Of course.
I'm talking about education in a very, very broad sense, including having to develop emotional intelligence and working on it. So, as parents, we don't go to schools to learn how to parent our children. So, education has to start from how we are parented. Our teachers have to be educated. In England, you will have counselors in schools and universities. There aren't very many mental health professionals properly trained who are able to, and some of them are not genuinely interested in terms of transmitting their knowledge and views over social media, which can be very far-reaching. So I think education is the key, and I'll say it as many times as you want. Education, education, education.
And so when it comes to elderly individuals and parents like you yourself very rightly so mentioned here, of course you can't send parents back to school. So media is that one most effective mechanism of educating them, which again means that the media itself, that needs to be educated to start off with. Media needs to be literate enough. They need to project the right narrative in terms of actually doing away with intolerance rather than in ways more than one perpetuating it. Basim, I would want you to comment on this further. But when we do talk about generally combating intolerance in the society, one thing that we do, of course, understand is the fact that we all have that fundamental right of freedom of expression or freedom of speech per se. But having said that, we also understand the fact that this, of course, comes with its own limitations as per the Pakistani constitution too. But overall, if you were to then strike a balance between oneself being able to express themselves freely and at the other end also ensuring that yes, in the course of doing so, they are not intolerant towards the other person, how do you propose can we strike that fine balance?
Well, that takes us to the Constitution of Pakistan, which is the Article 19, that is freedom of speech. And in that same article, it is written that every citizen shall have the right of freedom of speech, but it is also written that subject to some restrictions. Now, when we talk about the restriction, it is the same balance you are talking about. Let me give you an example. We have a right to criticize any judgment. We have a right to criticize any policy. But when we start criticizing the author of that judgment or the policy maker in sense of bias, so when there's a bias in the way, so there's a thin line between fake news and freedom of speech. So we need to figure out, first of all, we need to identify. the impact of fake news. And we also need to figure out the impact of the actual freedom of speech which has been given under the Constitution of Pakistan. It is not just the freedom of speech, but also the right of information. It is not just the right, fundamental right of a citizen regarding the freedom of speech. It is also my right for the information. And to fulfill the right of information, we need to first fulfill the right of freedom of speech.
Right, sir. But sir, moving towards the end of the show, before we wrap up today's discussion, what are the tips that you would want to give to the people out there, especially when it comes to actually incorporating that culture of tolerance in their respective lives? Because we can all start somewhere. So what do you propose would be a good starting point? What are the tips that you would want to give to the people?
I think as a general tip for all emotions, including tolerance and intolerance, we need to have an understanding of ourselves first, and then we need to address and identify our biases. We need to then work through our intolerances, develop a habit of becoming tolerant, developing new neuroplastic pathways in the brain to be actually produce a self that is more tolerant, more understanding, which embraces diversity.
And also, sir, not to live your life in denial.
Of course
Because
not.
a lot of times you know that there is something wrong, you know that you're being intolerant, or for that matter, you're being subjected to intolerance,
Of
but you
course.
choose to stay quiet about it. So you need to be vocal
so
about it.
identifying and being vocal in the right way,
Right.
So tolerance does not mean that you don't express yourself. Tolerance means that you express yourself in a socially acceptable and respectful manner. So reflective practice, I think before people should go to sleep, they should kind of reflect on how they have been intolerant or whether they have been tolerant and how they could have done things differently. So, and have your mental health issues addressed, including your psychological issues, and tolerance is certainly one of them. So
Right.
I'll thank you at that, and thank you, Fatma, for
Of
inviting
course,
me.
sir, as important as it is for any individual to seek timely interventions with reference to, of course, reaching out to professionals like yourself, what is equally important is that the family also seeks counseling.
Absolutely.
Because in a society like ours, where mental health issues are so deeply rooted and by that virtue deeply stigmatized too, the counseling is something which should also, extend to the family at large, because you can't get out of it if you're not supported by your family. On which I'll come to you, Fatma. So overall, if you were to then conclude today's show, what are the areas you feel that we need to work upon when it comes to reforming our current education system, that too with the perspective of not only making it more tolerant, but also more inclusive too?
Yeah, this is the question and the most important part of our society building. Academia has to play multiple tiers role. For instance, for the sake of teachers, we have to develop the culture of training sessions for the teachers. They must be able to patiently listen and cultivate and nurture the students in coexistence. First, we have to become a role model for the students from which you are going to expect something. And then during the sessions, during the classes, I'm talking about from the grade 1 till the university level or maybe post-grad level. We have to develop a human being. We have to make them listen to each other, and we have to make them say whatever they want to say, and then come to a conclusion with togetherness.
True.
Instead, we are going to, what we are doing today is that we are poking into their vision, their perceptions, their views, and we want and we are asking them to present something like a rote learner.
Basically, what you mean to say in essence is that we are then forcing our views onto them is not the right approach to take. But here, do you not feel that the role of different industries, for example, the role of entertainment industry, that can be extremely important here? A lot of times we've seen that celebrities, public figures, people in positions of power, they've come forward and they've actually advocated for more than one social causes. So why not talk about the very pressing issue of tolerance? And this is something which just not Pakistan is struggling with, but rather the entire world is faced with. Even if you see this globally, in the US, you would remember that very stark example of George Floyd, that prime example of racial injustice. So here, when it comes to media, the celebrities, people belonging to important positions of power, public figures, they have an extremely important position they have an extremely important role to play too.
And that is very rightly said by you. And we have actually seen the celebrities playing pivotal role and participating in the fight against harassment issues. You must have been aware of
course,
all
the
these.
Me Too movement.
Yeah, Me Too movement, and then.
Do you not remember the Black Lives Matter movement?
true.
Exactly, that became so global, so viral world over.
So I think the celebrities and the main stakeholders, they have the responsibility, because public are, following them, and they like the glamorous vision rather than a very black and white version. So through media, through these multiple mediums, these celebrities and entertainment segments, we can definitely and surely slow and steadily fight the
We should take it up, basically. That's right. But in addition to that, pop culture again has a very profound impact on the society too, and that again could be possibly used so as to advocate for greater tolerance in the society too. Right, madam, your point is noted. My last question to you would then be that when we do talk about overall working towards a more tolerant and a more inclusive Pakistan, how do you propose can we do just that, that too by virtue of using youth exchange programs? Because globally we have seen that they are used not only to generally inculcate that spirit of open-mindedness in young people, but also at the same time ensure that yes, they are in their own respective capacities working towards a more tolerant society. So how do you feel can we apply these concepts to our Pakistani society?
Right. So the first thing is, I've also been part of the exchange programs, and we were divided in the group of four. We were four groups. And one group was sent to the United Kingdom, the other group was sent to Sudan, one was in Singapore, and another was in China. What we have concluded, all of us, that it gives you vast exposure, and that is actually what we need, because diversity comes out of exposure, number one. Number two is productivity and productive skills. In Pakistan, 60% of our economy is based on the remittance, which is coming from the abroad. And we always think about not leaving Pakistan, but the actual thing is we actually need to export the skilled labor outside Pakistan for more remittance. So if through exchange programs we have already worked abroad and in different countries, we can actually advocate easily while coming back to Pakistan and also implement the we can also implement the productive skills while coming back. And also one more thing, the people who visited Singapore out of us, they told us about meritocracy. Whenever you hear any Singaporean leader, they would never tell you about hard work, consistency, or anything else. They always tell you one success ingredient, and that is meritocracy. And we had about 10 people visiting Singapore, and on their return back, in their own field, some of them are entrepreneurs, some of them are working with the government and in different fields. They have achieved a lot through this one ingredient which they had learned from those exchange programs, and that was meritocracy. And they are being able to actually educate a lot more people in Pakistan about this, about the productive techniques and about the meritocracy they've learned through those exchange programs.
So it's very important then that we actually capitalize on a young population, harness the potential of the same, that too with reference to such youth exchange programs, because in the long term, if we were to structure these properly, if we were to streamline these properly, this is definitely a very big asset to our society at large, because by actually initiating such programs, you are actually inculcating that spirit of not only acceptance of diversity, but also tolerance by that virtue.
Of course, Fatma, thank you for having me on your show.
You're most welcome. Thank you for joining us. On which note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. Thank you so much, Ms. Fatma, and thank you so much, Masim, for your time today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about this multifaceted issue of growing intolerance as it does stand in the Pakistani society. We not only spoke about its deep-rooted causes in the Pakistani society as they so may exist, but we also spoke about possible solutions to the same. In this, we need to understand the fact that the Pakistani media here has an extremely important role to play, especially when it comes to doing away with the typical stereotypes, which in turn, of course, do perpetuate intolerance in the Pakistani society. And one thing which we all need to, of course, actively work upon is definitely reforming our education system, that too in a way which generally does promote a culture of, tolerance and, of course, acceptance by that virtue too. Thank you for watching The Society. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.